Welcome back, everyone, to another edition of the SERMAPod. This is the podcast for the Sports and Entertainment Risk Management Alliance. I am the founder and CEO, Rich Lenkov. I'm also the host most of the time. And as you know, from listening and watching for almost 100 episodes, we try to cover the most breaking legal news in sports and entertainment. And this certainly is a story that's ripped from the headlines. A few weeks ago, Mark Sanchez, who is a broadcaster and a former NFL quarterback for several teams, most notably the Jets, was arrested in an altercation in a Indianapolis alley late at night. We're very privileged to have Professor Jodi Balsam, who teaches sports law at Brooklyn Law School and also NYU School of Law. Professor Balsam is all over media on these kind of issues. You've seen her in The Athletic, Golf Channel, ESPN, many other publications and broadcasts. She also is the former National Football League counsel for operation and litigation. And we are very privileged to have her today to talk about Mark Sanchez. Professor, welcome to the SERMAPod.
Thank you for hosting me.
All right, so this story's been widely covered. We want to get into some of the legal, both civil and criminal implications. But, from a media perspective, what are your thoughts so far on how the media have covered the story and the narratives that seem to be taking shape around Mark Sanchez's arrest?
Well, we are recording this now about a month after the October 4th incident, and the media has focused on three things: the what, the why, and the aftermath. What happened, as depicted in the media and available videos, is a bizarre incident in which Mark Sanchez, who was in Indianapolis to announce a football game for Fox Sports, is seen stalking the neighborhood of his hotel after leaving a pub. Now, he's a former football player. He's only 38 years old, and he's of considerable size and strength. And sometime after midnight, he allegedly attacked a 69-year-old truck driver named Peter Toll in the hotel loading dock. And by the end of the altercation, Toll suffered significant injuries, including to his head, his neck, his face, which suffered a gash that punctured his cheek and tongue. And in response to the alleged attack, Toll in turn had used a pepper spray and a knife to stab Sanchez, allegedly in self-defense. So that's the what. The why, which the media has speculated extensively about, is that it was allegedly an unprovoked attack, that Sanchez has not provided any explanation, although there's some evidence that he was inebriated. We're still waiting on the toxicology report at the time we're recording this. And it was initially suggested that there was an altercation over the location of the victim Toll's delivery truck, but it was parked in a hotel loading dock where Toll had been summoned to pick something up, and Sanchez was on foot, not in a car looking for a parking space. As to the why this might have happened, former teammates of Mark Sanchez and his wife have made statements that suggest that Sanchez has a substance abuse problem and has acted aggressively, even violently, when inebriated in the past. And in fact, the press has reported a statement by Sanchez's wife in which she said, "None of this shocks me. I remain silent to protect our son." And I can talk a little bit about the aftermath, the other focus of press reporting on this incident.
Yeah, please. I mean, you're an expert in media coverage of these kind of issues, and I'm interested in the press coverage and also how that might affect, how a jury perceives him if it gets that far. He's been charged with a level 5 felony, which is battery involving serious bodily injury. That felony carries a potential sentence of 1 to 6 years in prison. How do you think that so far the media coverage will play out at a trial if we get that far?
Yes. So, he's been charged with the felony. I should also mention, and we can get back to this later, that the driver has filed a civil complaint against Sanchez for the assault and battery, but also against Sanchez's employer, Fox Broadcasting Network, for negligent hiring, retention, and supervision. But anyway, getting to the criminal charges, yes, it's a level 5 battery, and the media framing of these charges are always sort of suspected as influencing what prosecutors do. But I would say that there's so much video and physical and eyewitness evidence in this case that there was probably no need for public outcry to justify throwing the book at Sanchez. That said, celebrity cases attract significant media and public attention, putting every prosecutorial decision under a microscope. And there may also be political considerations. Prosecutors, including this one, is an elective official, and the decisions might be shaped by what would appeal to voters who expect accountability. And as you mentioned, there's a concern that the extensive media coverage can make it difficult to find an impartial jury that hasn't been influenced by what they've seen or read or watched, impacting the fairness of any trial. But given the approach taken by the prosecutors so far and the evidence that has been revealed through media reports, it doesn't look like Sanchez is benefiting from any celebrity privilege here.
In fact, the prosecutors have said that, we intend, as we always do, on prosecuting any crime that happens within our jurisdiction to the fullest extent of the law, no matter who it is. But, to what extent do you think, and you touched on this, prosecutors who are in many cases elected officials, motivated by making an example out of a high profile defendant, be a political figure or in this case, a well-known broadcaster and former quarterback, how much does that impact their decision as to how they're prosecuted?
Well, they don't need to make or to drum up any sort of color around this incident to make an example of Sanchez. It came well stocked with enough color to justify any prosecutor, even if it weren't a celebrity perpetrator, to throw the book at him. And that has been exacerbated by Sanchez's own behavior in the wake of the incident. He has not attempted to draw any public sympathy. His representatives post incident have made statements that, frankly, seem to display a complete lack of accountability for Toll or empathy for Toll. He's not expressed any remorse. I have not read anywhere that he has even said that he wished the old man to completely recover.
Yeah. And presumably, as you mentioned, the video evidence is going to be very compelling, even if Sanchez will, as expected, mount some kind of, self-defense, arguing that he was the victim or he was simply responding to the aggression by the driver. When you consider the video, the picture that was released almost immediately of this individual in the hospital, and he had a gash in his face, even though, he was the one who stabbed Sanchez. Obviously, at some point, he had the knife turned on him, residing in this massive gash in his face, and he was battered all over the body. That was a pretty compelling video, as opposed to the video of Sanchez walking out of the hospital a couple days later. He seemed down and depressed, but he physically, I know his arm was in a sling, but he seemed fine. Comparing those two pieces of evidence, that would seem pretty compelling evidence of the battery.
Yeah, I mean, Sanchez, like I said, he's a former football player. He has considerable height and strength. He's remained fit. And the victim here, or Peter Toll, assuming he's the victim and not the perpetrator, he is a 69-year-old man. And from the photos that we've seen of him in his hospital bed, doesn't seem very capable of perpetrating a aggression against somebody of Mark Sanchez's physique.
So, Professor, Sanchez was scheduled to broadcast the Colts game later, a few hours later. He was replaced immediately. He has since been replaced. I don't know if that's a permanent thing, but you would imagine it would be. You raised an interesting legal question earlier. From a civil perspective, what happens when an athlete, either who is a broadcaster, in this case, a broadcaster, they're charged with a crime like this and they're sued civilly? What responsibilities does his employer have to respond? Obviously, one response I would think they would take legally is that this was our employee, yes, but at the time he was acting, he was not acting within the scope of his employment. He was acting well outside the duties that we hired him for. And part of that isn't, stalking an alley at midnight, worrying about, drivers parking. And that's outside the scope of his duties. I would imagine that's one of the defenses that Fox would mount in trying to extricate themselves civilly.
Absolutely. And to get us up to date here, Sanchez was dropped from football broadcasts immediately after the incident. And just a couple of days ago, before this recording, on November 7th, Fox Sports announced that they fired him. And that does not, of course, exonerate them yet from the civil suit that's been brought. That suit alleges that not only Sanchez is culpable of an assault and battery and seeking damages from him, but that the Fox Broadcasting Network is responsible vicariously for negligently hiring, retaining, and supervising Sanchez. And that's going to require the plaintiff there, Peter Toll, to establish that Fox knew or should have known about Sanchez's unfitness as an employee, his propensity for drinking and or harmful conduct. And there's no evidence yet that been revealed in the press, at least, that Fox had that knowledge, whether actual or constructive. But that, of course, all leaves to be seen. And we do know now that at least Sanchez's teammates and family members understood that, or at least have stated that they thought he had such violent propensities.
Professor, you were in these rooms in your previous job. Give us a behind the scenes look at what kind of rules, procedures, policies exist, not just for players. We know that the NFL is very more than ever proactive about trying to keep their players out of these situations, but former players, broadcasters, after all, Fox Sports is a partner with the NFL. This is a high profile broadcaster. What kind of rules exist to prevent this? In other words, was Sanchez ever told? Does his contract stipulate that you shouldn't be out after midnight? You shouldn't be drinking. You shouldn't be doing these kind of things.
Yeah,
what do those contracts look like?
well, to that point, and let me just circle back to something you mentioned earlier about whether what Sanchez was doing past midnight on the streets of Indianapolis would be considered in the as part of his employment. So he's there for a couple of days to cover the game, and it could be argued that every moment he spends in Indianapolis, he is doing so as a representative of Fox Sport in the course of his employment. So there may be a strong argument that despite the fact that his duties at Fox Sports don't include specifically to spend some time after hours drinking and wandering the streets, that doesn't necessarily get them off the hook as to whether what he was doing at that moment was in the course of his employment. As to how the network and or the league might react with respect to somebody who is a name and a face representing their entertainment product, Sanchez is no longer an employee of the league. While a commissioner has broad discretion in most leagues under their best interest of the sport clauses to discipline athletes and other personnel for off-field misconduct, that doesn't apply to former athletes employed by a broadcast network. I mean, the NFL has no contractual authority once an athlete is retired unless the athlete holds some sort of official ambassadorship or advisory role tied to the league. As to Fox Sports, I mean, broadcast partners are likely to hire their announcers pursuant to employment contracts or company codes that usually include morality or conduct clauses that require their employees to avoid behavior that harms the network's reputation and even imposes on the employees an affirmative obligation to disclose any conduct that might trigger those clauses. And those, once triggered, that would allow the network to suspend, discipline, or otherwise terminate the employee. Not only that, but for both league conduct policies, as well as the kinds that you typically see with the broadcast networks, disciplinary action can occur as soon as allegations arise that might tar the brand's integrity, even before charges are brought or a criminal conviction has resulted. So Fox most likely was entitled under its contractual authority or company code to discipline Sanchez the minute these allegations came out. And they eventually did so after criminal charges had been brought.
Yeah, you raise a really interesting point, one that we've covered before on this podcast, which is that as a professional athlete, as a broadcaster, you don't really have the same due process rights that a civilian does, right? I mean, the concept of being innocent until proven guilty doesn't really apply. When you sign a contract, part of what you're signing away, especially in the high profile leagues like this, is that you are giving up your right to that presumption. The league has every right to consider you guilty and take whatever disciplinary action they've contracted with your union for before your, criminal rights kick in. So that's a very important distinction. Last question I'll ask for you is, Professor, do you think this fits into a broader trend of holding athletes and former athletes more accountable? Or is this pretty much the age-old story of, athletes doing many high-profile athletes doing bad things. Are we only hearing about this kind of thing more given the prevalence of cameras everywhere and social media and the fact that we hear more about this kind of thing?
Well, first, I'd like to point out that this is a much more straightforward, clear cut case of athlete misconduct. This is an alleged act of unjustified, unprovoked violence. This is not like situations involving offensive remarks where there might be free speech concerns or cultural differences come into play. This is a fairly straightforward situation for an athlete's brand being tarred and losing his commercial opportunities. But that said, it's not that the leagues and the public are holding them more accountable, but athletes themselves need to hold themselves more accountable as long as they increasingly exploit their celebrity and engage in an entrepreneurial activity that seeks to brand and commodify and extract revenue from their celebrity. And we see this more and more. I mean, athletes' careers extend far beyond their playing days. And even during their playing days, they're starting businesses, they're entering into multiple brand partnerships. So, if my advice to athletes, don't wait for the leagues or your brand partners to discipline you. You have to take it upon yourself if you want to continue this entrepreneurial activity and maximize your brand value during your career and beyond.
One of the foremost experts on sports law in the world, from Brooklyn Law School, Professor Jodi Balsam. Thank you so much for joining us on the SERMAPod. Please come back in the future.
Thank you.